Good morning and welcome to the Geopolitics Digest for June 21st, 2024. In today's episode, we have a lot to cover, as Friday seemed to be a very productive day for my go-to experts on geopolitics. Let's get started with Alex Cristoforo. In his recent news update, Alex Cristoforo delved into the intricate geopolitical maneuvers of Russian President Vladimir Putin, particularly focusing on his address in Vietnam and the implications of military agreements with North Korea. The update highlighted Putin's reference to historical military agreements with North Korea, which date back to the Soviet era, and his warning that Russia could escalate in support to North Korea if South Korea increases its arms supply to Ukraine. He also sheds light on Putin's criticism of the sanctions imposed on North Korea, labeling them as inhumane and drawing parallels to the historical siege of Leningrad. The Russian leader's stance on Ukraine's President Zelensky legitimacy was also discussed, with Putin's predicting Zelensky's political demise by 2025 due to controversial legislation. The situation in Kharkiv was another focal point, where Putin clarified that Russia's military actions were not aimed at capturing the city, but rather at creating a buffer zone. He accused the West of pushing Ukraine to reclaim the northern part of Kharkiv region at any cost, linking this to the upcoming NATO summit and the U.S. elections. Furthermore, Cristoforo touched upon Putin's remarks regarding the ceasefire proposal, suggesting that the West's rejection was anticipated and that the window for acceptance is closing rapidly. Putin's assertion that Russia does not seek external assistance in its military operations contradicts Western media narratives. The news update also includes insights into the U.S.'s redirection of Patriot air defense orders to Ukraine. As reported by the Financial Times, this move, seen as a sign of desperation, aims to bolster Ukraine's defense against Russian missile attacks. However, the scarcity of Patriot missile interceptors poses a significant challenge, with the current production sale unable to meet the demands of the conflict. In a broader context, Christopher reported that the growing interest of various countries, like countries in joining the BRICS alliance, indicating a shift in global alliances. He cited Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s comment on this development, urging the United States to view it as a wake-up call and something positive rather than as a threat. Lastly, the update touched upon the political fate of the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, speculating on his potential relocation to the United States following a political defeat. This narrative was intertwined with a satirical take on the globalist elite, humorously envisioning them in a fictional TV show set in California. In conclusion, Cristoforo's news update provided a comprehensive overview of Putin's strategic posturing in the face of international pressure, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and the shifting sands of global politics. As the world watches these developments unfold, the stakes remain high and the outcomes uncertain. Now let's move on to Judge Napolitano's judging freedom, and in Friday's lineup, he interviewed Larry Wilkerson, Douglas McGregor, and he had the roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Let's get started with his interview with Larry Wilkerson. In their conversation, Wilkerson considers Putin's peace plan pragmatic, assessing the battlefield and political situation accurately. He criticizes the West's rejection and delusional stance as expressed by Chancellor Scholz of Germany. He also touches upon Putin's visit to North Korea, and the visit is deemed significant by Wilkerson, recalling past cooperation with Russia and China in the six-party talks. He expressed concern over North Korea's decision to disregard the U.S. as a negotiable power and its ambition to reunify the Korean peninsula, potentially using nuclear weapons, something that really alarmed Judge Napolitano. In regards to U.S.-North Korea relations, Wilkerson is disturbed by the new relationship between Russia and North Korea, fearing the implications of a North Korea attack on South Korea and the potential involvement of Russian nuclear support. Regarding U.S. military concerns, they discussed the depletion of U.S. military resources due to commitments like supporting Ukraine, with Wilkerson warning about dangerously low supplies of offensive missiles. Regarding the Israel-Gaza conflict, the conversation touches on the contention between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF, with Wilkerson explaining Israel's wartime command structure and the challenges of defeating Hamas. Regarding U.S. involvement in potential conflicts, Wilkerson and Napolitano debate the U.S.'s capacity to engage in multiple conflicts, simultaneously questioning the wisdom of current foreign policy decisions, which set us on a collision course with China and Russia. Regarding Hezbollah and Israel, the discussion highlights the potential peril of Israel for Israel if it engages with Hezbollah, especially without the U.S. support, which isn't 100% certain. In Turkey's role in NATO, Wilkerson speculates on Turkey's possible departure from NATO and the strength of the Turkish military. Regarding Iran, Turkey, and the Russian alliance, they ponder the consequences of a united front between Iran, Turkey, and Russia against U.S. interest in the Middle East could potentially create a host of complications for the U.S.'s intentions in the region. Throughout the conversation, Wilkerson and Napolitano analyzed the complex web of international relations, military strategy, and political decisions. They emphasized the importance of understanding the broader implications of current events and the need for prudent foreign policy. Let's move on to the judge's interview with Douglas McGregor, and they cover, again, a wide range of geopolitical issues, and they focus on the U.S.'s foreign policy, military capabilities, and international relations. Here are the key points from that conversation. Regarding Western rejection of Putin's offerings, he wasn't surprised by the rejection, suggesting it was a final warning of the last chance to negotiate a positive outcome in Ukraine. He criticizes the West's inability to accept a changing global landscape and their loss of influence. The next thing they discussed was NATO's weakness and Putin's determination. The discussion highlights NATO's perceived weakness and Putin's commitment to a non-NATO Ukraine. McGregor points out the disconnect between Washington's expectations and the global realities. Regarding North Korea's relationship with China and Russia, contrary to popular belief, North Korea is not a Chinese satellite but has had historically hostile relations with China. Russia finds North Korea useful for horizontal escalation, and Putin's recent actions demonstrate his ability to create trouble for the U.S. in that region. Regarding the U.S. State Department's misguided views on North Korea, McGregor criticizes the U.S. misunderstanding of North Korea's relationship with China and Russia. He suggests that North Korea's willingness to support Russia and Ukraine, although not needed, is a sign of its own desperation, which should alarm the United States. Regarding the potential impact of Russia-North Korea relations, the agreement between Russia and North Korea could hinder the possibility of a peaceful reunification of Korean Peninsula. McGregor predicts the U.S.'s path to bankruptcy and decline in global influence. Regarding Israel's military and political challenges, the conversation touches on Israel's military casualties, which are high relative to the population and the internal pressures facing the country. McGregor describes Israel as a fortress state moving towards conflict with the southern Lebanon, highlighting especially the roving bands of people who are making sure that the population stays in lockstep with the government's position. Next, he talks about the U.S.'s military's readiness and supply issues, and he expresses concern over the U.S.'s military lack of surge capacity and readiness, and he criticizes the Pentagon's budget management and strategic planning. Regarding the dynamics of Middle Eastern politics, the discussion covers the complex relations between Israel, Hezbollah, and Iran, and other regional players. McGregor warns of the high danger of the conflict in the Middle East compared to the Ukraine, which could spiral out of control very, very quickly. They also discuss the role of the U.S. in potential conflicts. The conversation speculates on the U.S.'s involvement in potential conflicts in the Middle East and with NATO against Russia. McGregor doubts the U.S.'s capacity to sustain ground troop deployments in multiple regions. Regarding the future of the conflict in Ukraine, McGregor believes that the conflict in Ukraine will only end with when Russian tanks enter Kiev. He emphasizes Putin's reluctance to conquer Ukraine and the West's misinterpretation of his intentions. Throughout the conversation, McGregor presents a critical view of the U.S.'s foreign policy and military strategy. He suggests that the U.S. is failing to adapt to a multipolar world and is overestimating its military capabilities and influence. The discussion also reflects concerns about the potential for escalating conflicts in both Europe and the Middle East, with the U.S.'s role being questioned in terms of readiness and strategic direction. Now let's move on to the roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Um, the first thing they talk about is Russia's geopolitical maneuvering. Ray McGovern opens the discussion by highlighting Russia's shrewd geopolitical move in forging a defense alliance with North Korea. This alliance is significant as it is Russia's only defense pact, contrasting with its close but non-mutual defense relationship with China. McGovern emphasizes the strategic nature of this alliance, suggesting that it serves as a warning to the West about Russia's readiness to respond to conflicts not just in Europe but globally, leveraging North Korea's military might. The conversation sheds light also on North Korea's advanced missile capabilities, particularly the Topol-M missile, renaming the Hwasong-18 by North Korea. McGovern details the missile's sophistication, including its mobility, solid fuel technology, and ability to evade detection and interception. The panelists expressed concern over the lack of widespread awareness and discussion about these developments within the U.S. intelligence community and political leadership. Larry Johnson reflects on the challenges that these developments pose for the U.S. State Department's and Defense Department. He points out that the U.S. now must consider North Korea's involvement in any military planning against China, complicating the already tense geopolitical landscape. Johnson criticizes the effectiveness of long-standing U.S. sanctions on countries like North Korea, Iran, and Cuba, arguing that they have failed to achieve their intended outcomes and have instead fostered animosity toward the U.S. The panelists discussed the ongoing war in Ukraine, with McGovern criticizing the U.S. for depleting its own military supplies by prioritizing aid to Ukraine. They expressed skepticism about the Pentagon's awareness of the dwindling supplies and questions the logic behind the U.S.'s continued support for the conflict, suggesting political motivations tied to domestic elections. The conversation also touches on Israel's military strategy, particularly its approach to dealing with Hamas and Hezbollah. The panelists debate the rationality of the Israeli government's actions, suggesting that personal and political motivations, especially by Netanyahu trying to avoid any sort of conviction or prison sentence if he were to be removed from office, and that this may be driving decisions that could lead to further conflict in the region. Overall, the roundtable presents a sobering analysis of the current state of international relations with military strategy. The conversation between Napolitano, McGovern, and Johnson highlight the complexity of global politics and the potential repercussions of strategic decisions made by world powers. It underscores the need for more nuanced understanding of international alliance and the importance of considering the long-term implications of military and foreign policy decisions. The insights provided by these experts call for a reassessment of traditional approaches to diplomacy and conflict resolution, advocating for strategies that prioritize stability and peace over short-term gains and political posturing. All right, now let's move on to Dialogue Works with Nima. And yesterday I got his name wrong. I called him Dima, but his actual name is Nima. Again, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He had 3 interviews yesterday with Andrei Martyanov and Larry Wilkerson, again, who the judge interviewed also, and with Richard Wolff. Let's get started with his interview with Andrei Martyanov. The interview highlights the importance of Putin's visit to North Korea and Vietnam, signaling Russia's strategic pivot toward Asia in response to Europe's alignment with Atlanticist policies. These visits underscore Russia's intent to extend its influence and possibility offer military support to North Korea, which could have far-reaching implications for regional stability. Russia's potential military support to North Korea and the economic relief that may follow from Russia as aid are discussed. This could alter the balance of power in the region and challenge the existing geopolitical order in that region. The conversation touches upon the historical influence of the Soviet Union and how it informs Russia's current foreign policy. The conditions set by Putin for negotiations with the West are also examined, suggesting a firm stance against Western pressure. The lack of substantial Western support for Ukraine's military needs is critiqued. It's suggested that the internal political motivations, and the PR strategies are driving the rhetoric of European countries rather than a genuine commitment to Ukraine's cause. The unrealistic expectations of Ukraine joining NATO are discussed, along with a shift in energy dynamics. Despite sanctions, Russia has overtaken the U.S. in gas supplies to Europe, which indicates the continent's heavy reliance on Russian energy. The interview suggests a decline in Europe's economic and political influence and the rise of multipolarity in global affairs. The possibility of BRICS playing a significant role in the future of Palestine and the changing dynamics in the Middle East, especially with Saudi Arabia reassessing its alliances are indicative of this shift. There's a strong critique of the United Nations and other international organizations, labeling them as corrupt and ineffective. This reflects a broader skepticism about the current international order and the need for reform. The rapidly changing global landscape with shifting power structures and alliances is a recurring theme. The interview suggests that traditional power centers are being challenged and new ones are emerging, reshaping the geopolitical map. In conclusion, the interview between Nima and Jeremianov presents a comprehensive overview of the current geopolitical climate with a particular focus on Russia's role in it. The discussion reflects on a world in transition where old alliances are being questioned and new ones are forming, signaling a move towards a more multipolar world order. Now let's move on to Nima's interview with Larry Wilkerson. In the interview, they delve into various geopolitical issues with a focus on the conflict in Ukraine. Um, Wilkerson expresses confusion over John Kirby's statements and motivations, suggesting that Kirby should return to his previous naval duties due to his inconsistent messaging for the administration. Regarding the supposed peace summit in Switzerland, which was supposed to host 90 countries, saw only about 50 attend. Notable absences included Russia and other BRICS nations, which questioned the legitimacy of a peace conference without one of the main antagonists. Regarding Zelensky's requests, 10 requests at the summit were narrowed down to 3: food security, nuclear safety, and the return of Ukrainian children. The other 7 were not addressed in detail. Regarding Putin's preconditions to peace, Putin outlined preconditions for a peace conference, which Wilkerson found rational and pragmatic, contrasting with the West's lack of a coherent counteroffer. Wilkerson also mentions that some of his military colleagues acknowledge Russia's upper hand in the conflict and question the continuation of U.S. support for Ukraine. There's a growing realization within the U.S. military that unless NATO directly enters the war, which is not desired, Russia has effectively won that war. Wilkerson cites a thorough analysis indicating that most Americans believe Russia is winning the conflict, though this does not translate to support for Putin or for Russia. The administration is also criticized for not reflecting the majority view of the American people, with Wilkerson questioning Biden's awareness and command of the situation. Putin has expressed a willingness to build upon negotiations in Istanbul from 2022, which Wilkerson sees as beneficial for Ukraine and for the West. Wilkerson also discusses the conditions under which Russia might consider using a tactical nuclear weapon, emphasizing that any action must be existential to warrant such a response. The world is realigning away from Washington, according to Wilkerson, which conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, diminishing U.S.'s power and reputation in the world. Wilkerson also predicts that Israel may not exist in 20 years due to its inability to maintain a Jewish state and a liberal democracy simultaneously. He seems to believe that those are two mutually exclusive propositions. The U.S. regarding Saudi and U.S. relations, he comments that the U.S. offered a defense treaty to Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel, which Wilkerson views as an act of desperation that may not yield a sustainable solution. In conclusion, Wilkerson provides a critical analysis of the current geopolitical landscape, highlighting the disconnect between political leaders' actions and public opinion, the potential consequences for a continued conflict, which are catastrophic, and the shifting global alliances that challenge traditional power structures. Now let's move on to Nima's conversation with Richard Wolff. In this thought-provoking interview, Nima delves into the complex world of global politics with esteemed Professor Richard Wolff. The conversation begins with a reflection on the preconditions set forth by President Putin regarding the conflict in Ukraine, highlighting regions under Russian control and the stipulation that Ukraine must not join NATO. Putin's willingness to negotiate based on previous discussions in Istanbul is noted, albeit with the caveat that these conditions could evolve over time, which usually mean there are going to be fewer and fewer options. The discourse then shifts to the peace summit in Switzerland, where the Finnish president's grievances about Russia's World War II invasion and subsequent territorial annexation are brought to the light. Wolff points out the omission of Finland's Nazi alliances during the war and Russia's eventual return of the captured territory, framing it as a significant oversight. A controversial proposal by the Finnish president to decolonize Russia by dividing it into 200 smaller ethnic states is examined. Wolf likens this to similar policies in Taiwan, where there are there are calls to quote unquote decolonize Taiwan from China. He views these actions not as steps toward peace, but as escalation towards conflict. Wolf attributes the current geopolitical tensions to a shifting world economy. He argues that symbolic political gestures by the West, including Finland and Poland, are acts of desperation in response to their declining global influence. The West's historical dominance, once unchallenged post World War II, is now fading as new economic powers emerge. The interview highlights the United States' historical partnership with Europe and its struggle to adapt to a world where its hegemony is no longer assured. The collapse of the Soviet Union, once seen as a victory for Western dominance, has ironically contributed to the West's current predicament. The capitalists' class pursuit of profit in China through investment in technology sharing has inadvertently empowered China's rise. Wolf describes China's economic model as a successful blend of private and public sectors managed by the Communist Party. This model has propelled China to unprecedented growth, challenging the West's economic and political clout. The conversation touches on the strategic alliance between China and Russia, with Russia seeking to reassert its global relevance and China benefiting from a strong military ally. This partnership, Wolf argues, is a natural response to the shifting balance of power, leaving the West with limited options short of nuclear conflict. The interview critiques the West's handling of the Ukrainian crisis, likening it to past military defeats in Vietnam and Afghanistan. The Swiss Peace Conference is characterized as a farce, excluding one of the warring parties and reflecting the West's inability to garner the same level of international support it once did at the outset of the war. Wolf's analysis extends to the broader implications of the West's decline, including the diminished role of the US dollar and the shifting alliances of key allies like Saudi Arabia. He observes a global realignment as countries like Niger welcome Russian influence over American. The essay, this interview concludes with Wolf's reflection on American society's historical violence and its current political theater. He suggests that the U.S. Is struggling to come to terms with its diminished status, unable to reconcile its perception with the realities of multipolar world. All right, that concludes Dialogue Works interviews. Now let's move on to three of Glenn Greenwald's reports he put out today, one on APAC, the other one on another interview with Rand Paul, and then a report he did on Biden's age. All right, in his report on APAC, he delves into the significant influence of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, APAC, within the U.S. political landscape, particularly highlighting its power to shape congressional outcomes. APAC, a prominent pro-Israel lobby, is known for its ability to sway political decisions and even unseat members of Congress who are perceived as insufficiently supportive of Israel. The report points out that while there are numerous influential lobbies in Washington, such as those representing Wall Street, Big Pharma, and Big Tech, APEC stands out for its unique capacity to directly impact congressional careers. This is evidenced by its targeting campaigns against politicians like Congressman Jamal Bowman, who, despite often supporting Israel, has faced opposition from AIPAC due to his occasional criticisms of the state. Greenwald emphasizes the rarity of incumbent politicians losing their seats, citing statistics that show a high rate of re-election for sitting members. However, AIPAC has demonstrated a remarkable ability to overcome this incumbent advantage, leveraging its resources to influence primary elections and remove those who do not align with its agenda. The report also sheds light on the financial aspects of AIPAC's influence, particularly in the case of New York's 16th congressional district, where a staggering amount of $23 million was spent, making it the most expensive House primary ever. The majority of this spending was attributed to negative campaigning against Bowman, orchestrated by AIPAC-affiliated groups. Interestingly, Greenwald notes that AIPAC's campaign strategy often avoid direct mention of Israel. Instead, they focus on other issues to appeal to a broader electorate, thereby masking the true motive behind their political interventions. Furthermore, the report discusses the broader implications of AIPAC's actions, suggesting that its success in shaping congressional votes on Israel-related matters instills a sense of caution amongst politicians. This influence extends beyond individual races, affecting the overall congressional stance on Israel and potentially deterring criticism of Israeli politics. and policies. In conclusion, Glenn Greenwald's report offers a critical examination of AIPAC's role in the U.S. politics, highlighting its strategic operations and the profound impact it has on the democratic process. It serves as a reminder of the complex interplay between lobbying groups and elected officials and the power dynamics that can shape national policy decisions. Um, Now let's go into his interview with Rand Paul. In a world gripped by the COVID-19 pandemic, the quest for truth regarding its origins and management has been relentless. In this interview, Glenn Greenwald delves into the bipartisan resistance to a comprehensive investigation of the pandemic's handling, a stark contrast to the thorough inquiries conducted for other significant events in American history. Um, Senator Rand Paul emerges as a pivotal figure in the pursuit of answers challenging the narrative surrounding the pandemic's origins and the controversial gain-of-function research. His exchanges in the Senate reveal a troubling discrepancy between private admissions and public statements by key scientific figures, suggesting a lab leak as a plausible origins for the virus. The report highlights a pattern of obfuscation with deleted emails and altered records, pointing to a concerted effort to evade transparency. Particularly at the center of this is Anthony Fauci. This behavior raises profound questions about the integrity of the scientific community, particularly of Anthony Fauci's integrity, and the government's role in disseminating information or misinformation, as it were. Greenwald's interview with Senator Paul uncovers inertia within Congress to establish a commission akin to those formed for the JFK assassination or 9/11. The lack of such initiative for an event as transformative as the COVID-19 pandemic is both perplexing and concerning. The senator's scrutiny extends to Anthony Fauci, whose actions and communications have come under fire. Allegations of email deletions and manipulations of information to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests paint a picture of a cover-up at the highest levels of health policy making. The report also touches on the ethical quandaries of gain-of-function research and the political dangers it poses. Despite the known risks, there appears to be a push within Washington to further legitimize and fund such research, raising alarms about the direction of scientific inquiry and its governance. Greenwald's report is a sobering reminder of the unresolved issues that linger as the world continues to grapple with the pandemic's aftermath. It calls for a renewed commitment to transparency, accountability, and ethical considerations in scientific research and public health policy. Now let's move on to his report on Biden's age. In this report, he delves into the sensitive topic of President Joe Biden's age and the growing public concern over his cognitive abilities. At 81 years old, President Biden is the oldest serving president in U.S. history, and if reelected, he would be 85 by the end of his second term. The discourse around his cognitive decline has been a point of contention since 2019, with concerns initially raised by Democratic National Committee operatives. The concerns about Biden's cognitive state were not born out of bipartisan attacks, but rather from within his own party. High-profile DNC loyalists and media figures expressed apprehension about Biden's potential automatic nomination due to his long-standing political presence and familiarity with Democratic voters. They highlighted noticeable changes in Biden's public appearance compared to his earlier years in the Senate and as vice president. Once Biden secured the Democratic nomination in 2020, the narrative shifted. Those who previously questioned his cognitive abilities began to defend him, attributing any perceived communication difficulties to a lifelong stutter rather than cognitive impairment. This defense has been criticized as disingenuous by Greenwald, given the same individual's earlier stance. The American public, including Democratic voters, has increasingly voiced concerns about Biden's capability to fulfill presidential duties. Greenwald argues that the corporate media has attempted to downplay these concerns, labeling any negative portrayal of Biden as manipulated or false. However, this contradicts the observable behavior of Biden in various public settings, which many Americans relate to experiences with aging family members. Greenwald accuses the media of being complicit in trying to conceive the public to ignore their own observations and judgments about Biden's state. He points to instances where the media has been accused of selectively editing or outright denying clear evidence of Biden's confusion during public events. The report concludes that despite media efforts, it's challenging to persuade the public to disregard their personal experiences and perceptions. Polls indicate a significant portion of Biden's own 2020 voters now question his effectiveness due to age, reflecting a broader concern that transcends political affiliations. All right, and that concludes Glenn Greenwald reporting. Now let's go on to a interview that Danny Haifong had with Pepe Escobar. Again, this may be 30 minute interview from a much longer interview with Pepe Escobar. In his recent interview, Pepe Escobar, a renowned journalist from Brazil, shared his acute observations on the shifting global order, marked by the waning unipolar dominance of the United States and the rise of a multipolar world spearheaded by the BRICS nations. Escobar's insights come at a time when the world is witnessing a convergence of crisis, from the Middle East tensions to the geopolitical chessboard of Ukraine. Escobar begins by addressing the palpable desperation of the old world order, particularly highlighting the ineffectiveness of Israel's actions against Iran, which only served to underscore Iran's strategic prowess. The retaliatory moves by Iran were seen as the reestablishment of deterrence, a quote-unquote checkmate in the complex geopolitical game. The conversation then pivots to the BRICS nations, especially in the context of the year deemed crucial for their collective decision-making. Escobar's personal experiences in Brazil during a tumultuous period provide a vivid backdrop for his analysis. He witnessed firsthand the discussions among BRICS finance ministers in Sao Paulo, where they deliberated on the de-dollarization and the implementation of blockchain-based payment settlements. Escobar emphasizes the significance of these developments, noting the construction of infrastructure projects like the port south of Lima by China's COSCO, aimed at bolstering trade with Asia. He also touches upon the potential railway corridors linking Brazil and Peru, which could transform South American logistics. The interview delves into the geopolitical implications of the BRICS expansion, with Saudi Arabia's potential membership causing ripples. Escobar dismisses the rumors of Saudi-Israeli normalization as mere American spin, instead highlighting the unbreakable bond between Saudi Arabia and China, which has personal dimensions involving mutual favors at the highest level. As the discussion unfolds, Escobar critiques the American narrative, pointing out the strategic depth and the coordination among the BRICS nations, particularly Russia, China, and Iran. He underscores the importance of their military and economic partnerships, which are shaping the future of global multipolarity. In stark contrast to the cohesive BRICS strategy, Escobar paints a picture of a polarized Brazil struggling with sovereignty issues. He laments the internal complexities that prevent Brazil from assuming a leadership within BRICS, a position now effectively occupied by Iran. The interview concludes with a reflection on the key question facing the global majority: who will rein in the genocidal tendencies that have been allowed to persist without consequence in Israel? Escobar leaves the audience pondering the moral imperative of the international community in the face of blatant human rights violations. All right, let's move on now to an interesting interview between Garland Nixon and Jody Brar, who is a very committed communist slash socialist. So that interview has a very, very, very strong tendency to romanticize the Soviet Union and attributes anything positive that ever came out of Russia or Russia to the Soviet era, and not making any references to the 1,000-year Russian history. And so it's a kind of a blind spot for Jody Brar. So just as you watch that interview, be mindful that she's an ardent communist, and but there are some contradictions in her, I think, her assessment of that, especially as it applies to Russia's reassertion of its place in the world. So that's something just to keep in mind as you listen to that interview. Anyways, here's the analysis on that. The interview between Garland Nixon and Jody Barr delves into the intricate web of geopolitical dynamics with a particular focus on the African continent's struggle against imperialism and its quest for true sovereignty. The conversation traverses through a myriad of topics, each shedding light on the historical and contemporary challenges faced by African nations in the shadow of Western hegemony. At the heart of discussion lies the role of India within the BRICS alliance and the resurgence of anti-imperialistic bloc. This bloc, as Barr suggests, is not merely a political stance, but a beacon of hope for oppressed nations that have long suffered under the narrative-driven policies of imperialist countries. The dialogue underscores the stark contrast between these narratives and the reality on the ground, where the impact of imperialism is felt most acutely. The situation in Saudi Arabia is examined as a microcosm of the broader imperialist agenda, where regional organizations are manipulated to serve Western interests. The fall of Libya is cited as a cautionary tale, illustrating the dire consequences of such interference. Barr and Nixon discuss how the lack of technological development, and self-defense of capabilities can leave nations vulnerable to external forces, emphasizing the need for African countries to bolster the defense against such threats. The concept of armed struggle in Africa is broached with a sense of gravity, acknowledging the harsh realities that necessitate such measures. The conversation pivots to the connection between poverty, lack of development, and terrorism, drawing a direct line between these issues and the legacy of Western imperialism. It is within this context that the importance of African unity and cooperation is championed, with Pan-Africanism heralded as a potential path toward an emancipation and progress. The interview highlights the popular support for new governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which are charting a course independent of Western military bases. These nations are striving to address terrorism and exploitation on their own terms, seeking solutions through regional collaboration, mainly with Russia and China, rather than reliance on external Western powers. Central to the conversation is the theme of the integration of unity as the keys to Africa's freedom and development. The powers of the masses, when united, is portrayed as an unstoppable force capable of standing against external pressures. The legacy of Thomas Sankara is invoked as a symbol of resistance and the embodiment of Pan-Africanism's potential to counter imperialism and foster sovereignty. They also discuss the historical support from the USSR and China to African liberation movements is acknowledged, highlighting the role of international solidarity in the fight against colonialism. However, the discussion also points to the detrimental impact of imperialism on the continent's progress, painting a picture of region rich in resources yet plagued by exploitation. The fear that imperialists harbor toward a unified Africa is palpable. As Barr and Nixon discuss the transformative power of Pan-Africanism, this ideology, they argue, has the potential to end the looting of the continent by foreign powers and pave the way for a future where Africa nations can thrive independently. In the interview, Barr provides a nuanced analysis of the relationship between Russia and North Korea with a broader context of anti-imperialist sentiment and the global geopolitics. He reflects on the period following the collapse of the Soviet Union, a time when Russia was reeling and China was not yet in a position to assume the role the USSR had played. During this tumultuous period, socialist countries, including the DPRK, Cuba, and Vietnam, were primarily focused on survival under challenging conditions. Barr notes the resurgence of the anti-imperialistic bloc, highlighting Russia's return as a significant player on the world stage, which has notably shifted the balance of power globally. The strengthening alliance between Russia, China, and DPRK is particularly emphasized, with Barr pointing out that these countries possess strong self-defense capabilities and a level of economic independence that makes them resilient to imperialist sanctions. The analysis touches upon India's complex position in this geopolitical landscape. Barr describes India as a large country with considerable resources and aspirations to become a world power. She observes that India's ruling class is divided between comprador and nationalist elements, but overall, there is an independent mindset even among the ruling class. This was evident during the war. This is evident in the war in Ukraine, where India, despite being a part of the Quad, chose not to break its relations with Russia, reflecting a unifying national stance against the demonization of Russia and Western war effort. Barr suggests that the formation of the AUKUS alliance without India and the country's refusal to align with the West's stance on Ukraine have created a rift between India and the imperialist powers. This division has been further deepened by the business opportunities that arose from the sanctions imposed by Russia, which India has been willing to explore. In summary, Jody Barr's analysis underscores the emergence of a cohesive anti-imperialist front led by countries like Russia, China, and the DPRK, which are increasingly collaborating to defend their sovereignty and resist Western sanctions. The relationship between Russia and North Korea is framed within the context of mutual support. Let's move on to a oral report given by Kim Iverson, in which she analyzes a article written by Neil Ferguson, a historian known for his pro-Western stance and defense of the British Empire. Ferguson's latest piece from the Free Press, introduced by Barry Weiss, challenges the current state of Western foreign policy, drawing parallels with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In a surprising turn of events, Neil Ferguson, a historian who has often championed the accomplishments of the British Empire, poses a critical question in his latest work, Are We the Baddies? This question, while seemingly comical, carries a weighty implication about the current direction of Western foreign policy, particularly that of the United States. Ferguson draws comparisons between the United States and the Soviet Union, noting similarities in their respective military and economic strategies. He points out the high infant mortality rate and the crumbling economy behind the Soviet facade, as well as the overemphasis on the vaunted military that ultimately proved ineffective. These historical realities serve as a mirror to the present-day United States, where, despite formidable defense budgets, the military faces challenges equal to the task it confronts. Iverson further explores Ferguson's critique of the U.S. strategy of encouraging proxy wars without providing adequate support, as seen in Ukraine. This approach, according to Ferguson, echoes the Soviets' inability to achieve victory despite a prolonged military effort, such as the one against the Taliban in Afghanistan. Moreover, Ferguson highlights the misleading narratives that pervade American society. He argues that institutions controlled by the Democratic Party claim to advance the interests of marginalized groups and promote democracy abroad, yet these assertions often do not align with reality. This discrepancy is likened to the Soviet propaganda that portrayed the U.S. and its allies as imperialists akin to the Nazis. The crux of Ferguson's argument lies in the recognition that the United States may be repeating the Soviets' mistake by focusing excessively on military might while neglecting domestic issues such as infrastructure and well-being of its citizens. He suggests that the U.S. should prioritize internal development over maintaining global military dominance. In conclusion, Kim Iverson's report on Ferguson's piece serves as a catalyst for introspection regarding Western foreign policy. It calls for a reassessment of priorities, urging a shift from external conflicts to internal growth and stability. The essay encapsulates the notion that true strength lies not in military prowess, but in the prosperity and happiness of a nation's people. All right, now let's go on to a episode on Russell Brand's YouTube channel, in which he goes over, he talks about the resurgence of Nigel Farage in UK politics. Russell Brand, a comedian and political commentator, has often used his platform to discuss various political figures and movements, including Nigel Farage, the former leader of the UK Independence Party, and a prominent figure in the Brexit campaign. In his reporting, Brand has drawn comparisons between Farage and other populist leaders, such as Donald Trump, suggesting that Farage's appeal lies in his ability to tap into public discontent with traditional political parties and the establishment. Brand has criticized Farage in the past for his right-wing populist stance, particularly on issues like immigration and national sovereignty. He has accused Farage of exploiting these issues for political gain, much like other populist politicians who use rhetoric that resonates with a segment of the population feeling left behind by globalization and economic change. In his analysis, Brand often highlights the irony of Farage's position as anti-establishment figure, given his background in commodities trading and his tenure as a member of the European Parliament. Brand points out that while Farage presents himself as a champion of the ordinary Britain, his policies and affiliations suggest a closer alignment with elite interests. Moreover, Brand has been vocal about the dangers of division divisive politics and the rise of authoritarian tendencies in leaders like Farage. He warns that the populist surge, while understandable and in the context of widespread dissatisfaction, can lead to increased polarization and social unrest. Russell Brand's commentary on Nigel Farage is indeed nuanced. While Brand does draw attention to Farage's populist approach and compares him to other figures like Donald Trump, he also acknowledges that the concerns that Farage's movement addresses, such as national sovereignty and immigration. Brand's stance appears to be one of skepticism towards both Farage's methods and broader political landscape, suggesting a complex view that does not fully align with or oppose any single political figure. Instead, Brand seems to be advocating for a deeper understanding of the issues at hand and the motivations behind political movements, where they are labeled as populists or globalists. All right, let's go on to a short video created by Katie Halper. I think it's also it's just a segment of an interview that she conducted with John Mearsheimer. So here's your daily dose of John Mearsheimer. And in it, mainly it's a critique of John Mearsheimer's critique of Lindsey Graham. And so in this interview, Katie Halper interviews renowned political scientist John Mearsheimer and offers a critical analysis of Senator Lindsey Graham's stance on the Ukraine conflict and Russia and President Vladimir Putin. Mearsheimer, a proponent of the realist school of international relations, dissects Graham's comparison of Putin to Adolf Hitler and the assertion that Putin harbors ambitions to create the Russian Empire. Mearsheimer challenges Graham's portrayal of Putin as a modern-day Hitler, intent on conquering Ukraine and beyond to re-establish a Soviet empire. He argues that such a comparison is not only historically inaccurate, but also a gross oversimplification of the complex geopolitical dynamics at play. Mearsheimer points out that Putin bears zero resemblance to Hitler, and that Russia today is far from the totalitarian regime of the Nazi Germany. The analogy suggests is a dangerous form of historical misrepresentation that distorts the reality of the situation. Central to Mearsheimer's critique is the lack of evidence supporting the claim that Putin aims to conquer all of Ukraine, let alone other Eastern European countries. He emphasizes that there is zero evidence to suggest that Putin has ever expressed or alluded to such imperialist intentions. Mearsheimer underscores the limitations of Russia's military capabilities, which have been evident since the war began in February 2022, where Russian forces have struggled to make significant advances in eastern Ukraine. Mearsheimer also addresses the misinterpretation of Putin's objectives regarding Ukraine. He highlights that Putin has been unequivocally clear since April 2014 that Ukraine's potential membership in NATO poses an existential threat to Russia. Mearsheimer contends that the West's refusal to acknowledge this concern has been a driving factor in the escalation of the conflict. He argues that Putin's military intervention was a response to NATO's eastward expansion, not an unprovoked act of aggression. The essay, the interview. In the interview, Mearsheimer in the interview, Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer also debunks the notion that Putin intended to conquer key Ukrainian cities like Kiev, citing the impracticality of such an endeavor given the size of Russian forces. Mearsheimer uses the example of the city of Kharkiv to illustrate the unrealistic expectation of Russian military conquest, arguing that the numbers simply do not add up. Furthermore, Mearsheimer points to Russia's immediate effort to initiate peace negotiations following the invasion as evidence contradicting the narrative of imperial conquest. He notes that the centerpiece of these negotiations was the concept of a neutral Ukraine, not its absorption into a greater Russia. This, according to Mearsheimer, belies the claim of Putin's supposed imperial imperialist ambitions. In conclusion, Mersheimer's critique of Lindsey Graham's analysis is a call for a more nuanced and evidence-based understanding of the Ukrainian conflict. It challenges the prevailing narratives and urges policymakers to consider the realist perspective, which prioritizes facts and strategic interests over emotive analogies and unfounded assertions. Mearsheimer's insights provide a valuable counterpoint to the discourse on international relations and highlights the importance of sober analysis in the face of complex international crises. Now let's move on to Andrei Martyanov's latest episode. In his latest podcast, Andrei Martyanov delves into a range of politics that sit at the intersection of geopolitics and military technology. And he first touches upon Vladimir Putin's visit to Southeast Asia, highlighting its success and the significant implications for international relations. Martyanov emphasizes the strategic partnership and potential alliances forming between Russia and North Korea, which is seen as a breakthrough against sanctions imposed on North Korea. He notes the positive reception of Putin's visit by Kim Jong-un, who perceives this partnership as a lifeline for his nation. Martyanov discusses the military aspects of this partnership, particularly the implications of Russia arming North Korea with advanced missile systems. He speculates that North Korea may have already received or will receive soon systems like the Iskander cruise missile variant. This would significantly enhance North Korea's military capabilities, allowing it to cover a wider range and achieve more accurate targeting. The conversation shifts to the economic benefits of the Russian-North Korea partnership, with Martyanov mentioning the employment of North Korean workers in Russian cities across various sectors. He also touches on the historical and current relationship between Russia and Vietnam, underscoring the deep ties rooted in the Vietnam War and the potential for future cooperation in areas such as nuclear technology. Martyanov criticizes Western media's portrayal of Russia, arguing that even when they change their narrative, it indicates a significant shift in perception. He cites an article from Bloomberg that questions America's role as a moral beacon, suggesting that the U.S. lost its moral authority post 9/11 and has since fallen behind in technological and military advancements. The podcast further explores Russia's nuclear capabilities and doctrine. Martyanov relays Putin's statement that Russia does not need to alter its nuclear doctrine, as it possesses the means to respond to any aggression effectively. He predicts that Russia will continue to develop its nuclear triad to maintain strategic deterrence and balance of power. Martyanov concludes with a discussion on the conflict in Ukraine, providing a grim assessment of the losses suffered by the Ukrainian armed forces. He criticizes the use of block detachments by Ukrainian forces, which he describes as units positioned to shoot at retreating soldiers. He also comments on the U.S.'s administration's policies towards Ukraine, suggesting a lack of a coherent strategy. Well, that's it for the summary of all the podcast that I listened to on geopolitics on Friday, June 21st, 2024. I encourage you again to click the links in the description to all these various interviews and podcasts so you can read them and listen to them for yourself. They're very, very enlightening. And I think, again, as I've mentioned before, it's important to stay informed and balance these independent voices with what we're hearing from the mainstream media, which is in large respects just parroting the official narrative from our political leaders here in the West. Until the next time, thanks.